Everyone, and welcome back. How's it going? And welcome back to the College Football Podcast with your host, Alec Pecado. Today's show is loaded. We're going over my top 5 Big Ten teams after the spring, top 5 ACC teams, and top 5 AAC teams, as well as much, much more. Before we get started today, I wanted to say, please, to keep the family of Brian Battie and your thoughts and prayers. He is going through some tough times right now. Him and his brother were involved in a fatal accident over the weekend in Sarasota. His brother did not make it. Brian Battie is in critical condition though. And I would hope that everybody would keep them in their thoughts and prayers. But let's get into the show. We're going to start off with the Big Ten. And before I get into my post-spring top 5, the first thing we're going to go over is my updated hot seat, top 5 head coaches on the hot seat for the Big Ten. And I have a surprising one at number 5. It is Penn State's James Franklin. So, here's my explanation on James Franklin and why he's at number 5 and he's not higher. I think Penn State's going to outperform expectations this year. And you may see them in my updated top 5 post-spring power rankings for the 5 Big Ten teams that I think had a really good spring. But I think that since they only have to play Ohio State this year and not Michigan, that Penn State might actually have a really, really good season. And that's why James Franklin's at number 5 and not higher. At number 4 is Minnesota's PJ Fleck. Now, I know what some people are going to say. Give Fleck an opportunity. Give PJ Fleck a chance. I have. And PJ Fleck does not seem to be working at Minnesota. And he's number 4 on my up-to-date hot seat for the Big Ten head coaches that might get fired, because I don't think, and when I do my conference preview for the Big Ten, you will see where I put Minnesota. They might finish middle of the pack in the Big Ten, but I don't think they're going to be higher than like maybe 13 or 14. The first 2 years for PJ Fleck at Minnesota were good. He had that really good season in 2022. And in 2020 was the COVID year. And I don't see an avenue where Minnesota wins more than 8 games this year. But I could also see where they do win more than 8 games, and PJ Fleck saves his job. Now we get into my top 3, and my top 3 are guys I think if their Big Ten team starts slow, they could be on the chopping block, and they could get fired. Number 3, Greg Schiano, Rutgers. Now, Rutgers does have a new quarterback this year. It is not going to be Gavin Wimsatt. They got Minnesota transfer Ethan Kaliakanis from Minnesota. He is their new quarterback. Gavin Wimsatt transferred to, I believe, another school in the Big Ten. But I don't foresee Rutgers. I can see them competing, but they will not be around. They will probably be around mid-table in the Big Ten this year. And I don't think that's going to be good enough for Greg Schiano, to keep his job, keep his employment status as the head coach at Rutgers. I think Schiano might get canned. He won't be the first guy fired. I told you in a previous pod episode of the podcast who that would be. I think he's either the second or third coach that gets canned this year. At number 2, unfortunately, is Ryan Walters of Purdue. And the reason Walters is at number 2 for me is Purdue, I just have a tough time figuring out how many games Purdue's actually going to win this year. I do like Hudson Card, but I think this was a rushed hire for Purdue when they fired their previous coach. And I think that Ryan Walters is probably on the hot seat. But if Purdue does win more than 5 games, I think Walters saves his job. At number 1 is the most obvious head coach that's on the hot seat in the Big Ten right now. And that would be Brett Bielema from Illinois. Illinois has had a tumultuous last couple seasons, and if it continues this year, I think Bielema is going to be canned. And preseason is when you'll get my rankings for the head coaches that I think could get fired this year. And Bielema's going to be on that list. So is PJ Fleck and Greg Schiano. And maybe even Ryan Walters. But back to Bielema. I no hate here for Bielema at all. I just think that Bielema is somebody that probably gets fired if Illinois starts 0-2, 0-3, 0-4, 1-5. And Illinois, I don't see them competing in the Big Ten this year at all. And it's sad to say. I don't think Luke Altmaier is that bad of a quarterback. I just think that Illinois doesn't have the intangibles to compete. And on Thursday at 4 o'clock, telling you right now, Thursday at 4 is when you get my win prediction totals for every team in the Power 4 and the AAC. So be looking out for that Thursday afternoon at 4 o'clock, as well as Thursday at 7 o'clock is going to be the pod episode where I talk about the Big 12 and the SEC. But back to this one. So, like I said about Bielema in Illinois, I think he gets fired if they start out the season slow or if they don't show strides. Now, here's something I'm going to say before I get into my updated top 5 Big Ten teams. And I saw this the other day. The NCAA is talking about getting rid of the walk-on rule for schools, because if you didn't hear, Cormani McClain, former 5-star cornerback from Colorado, transferred to Florida as a preferred walk-on, but he's still getting NIL money and getting paid by Florida to go there and play football as a walk-on to earn a scholarship. And I don't think I don't think it's right that he's allowed to do that. I think he should have to earn that scholarship, which he's going to have to. But that's that. We get back to here's my updated top 5 teams in the Big Ten after spring football. At number 5 is Washington. I like what Washington and head coach Jedd Fisch and his first season has done, whether it be the portal or whether it be through the recruiting and getting Will Rogers to stick around and stay at Washington and not jump back in the portal and go somewhere else, or whether it be reloading and retooling the wide receiver room and running back room. I think Washington will compete in year 1 in the Big Ten. And I here's my payoff. I mentioned earlier that I talked about Penn State earlier and James Franklin. I'm going to mention Penn State again. They're my number 4 team in the Big Ten after spring football. Drew Aller looks a lot better this year. He looked a lot better in the spring game this year than he did last year. And I wouldn't be surprised if Penn State is one of the top 2 teams in the Big Ten this year, along with maybe Ohio State, who you're going to hear me talk about later, and Oregon, who you're going to hear me chat about in a few minutes. But back to Penn State. They have one of the top 2 best duos of running backs in the Big Ten, behind Judkins and Travion Henderson of Ohio State, with Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. Of course, Drew Aller. They have Abdul Carter on defense. And I think they're going to have one of the better defenses in the Big Ten. And like I said, I can see Penn State finishing as high as 3 or 2 in the Big Ten, maybe winning the Big Ten regular season title from Ohio State. But let's get into my number 3 team in the Big Ten after spring football. It is Michigan. And Michigan's at number 3, and you would think it's because of the returning Donovan Edwards. No, it's because their defense. Mason Graham is back. They got a couple other guys back. Will Johnson. And they got a couple transfers that came over from Alabama and a few other schools. Keon Sabb was another one from, I believe, Alabama. He was a DB from Alabama. He transferred to Michigan. That defense for Michigan is going to be good. The only reason they're not in my top 2 is because I have questions with their quarterback position. They have not named a starting quarterback yet. And the one thing that worries me about Michigan is their quarterback, whether it be Alex Orji or one of the freshmen they have, or maybe they hit the portal and get a transfer. That's why Michigan is at number 3. Number 2 is Oregon. Dan Lanning knows how to recruit. Look, he flipped a couple guys that were going to go to Ohio State. He flipped them to Oregon, and then he gets Dylan Gabriel from Oklahoma to transfer over to Oregon. Yet another transfer. He did the same thing with Bo Nix, who was at Auburn and transferred to Oregon. And look at Bo Nix. He was a first-round pick, top 15 pick in the draft. Can he do this? Can he do the same thing with Dylan Gabriel? I think he can. And this Oregon offense is going to be really good this year. I really believe that this Oregon offense is going to be good. And I think they may be one of the top 2 teams along with Ohio State, Penn State, Washington, maybe even USC or UCLA. And speaking of my number one team after spring football in the Big Ten is Ohio State. And yes, I know what people are going to say. They have questions about the quarterback position. Is it going to be Will Howard? Is it going to be Julian Sayin? Is it going to be Devin Brown? Is it going to be Lincoln Keenholz? Is it going to be Aaron Olin? I think ultimately it's going to be Will Howard. But if Will Howard does struggle, don't be surprised if Julian Sayin is the next man up for Ohio State, and he's the second string. Because Ryan Day's been raving about him during spring ball, saying that he's going to get a significant amount of playing time. But Ohio State's pulling a Michigan from last year, bringing back a lot of guys. Emeka Egbuka came back. Travion Henderson came back. JT Tuimoloau came back. Tyleik Williams, Ty Hamilton, Denzel Burke. They added some guys in the portal from the portal. Julian Sayin, Quinshaw Judkins, Caleb Downs, Scott McLaughlin, an offensive lineman from Alabama. And I think Ohio State's going to be, this is the most talented roster Ohio State has had in a long time. And I think Ohio State might win the Big Ten this year. And on that note, we're going to get to the ACC here in a second. I just want to remind you, if you haven't seen the community polls being plural that I have up on YouTube, I would highly recommend going and voting on that. We have 2 polls up. One of them is for our Dynasty team for College Football 25, which comes out July 19th, but I have pre-ordered it, so I get it 3 days early. So we will be starting the Dynasty the first when early access starts. There's 2 polls. The top 2 picked teams will go to a final, and the winner of that will be the Dynasty. And also, September 5th through the 9th, that first community poll is a reminder that September 5th through the 9th, the College Football Podcast, and this Sports Talk Podcast YouTube channel will be in Blacksburg, Virginia, for Virginia Tech and Marshall football game. And that whole week, those 4 days that we're in Blacksburg, any of those days, if you see me, pull me to the side. We can chat. I will autograph anything you have. We can take photos together, chat. But back to the video. Just had to plug that for a minute. Now let's get talking about the ACC. So the ACC, I did it a little different. I did my top 5 teams after spring, and then I did the coaches. So let's start with my post-spring top 5 list for the top 5 teams in the ACC after spring football. At number 5 is Clemson. And I know what most of y'all are going to say in the comments. Why is Clemson at number 5? They should be inside your top 4. I'm going to explain why. It is not the quarterback position. Cade Klubnik is a junior this year. It is their wide receiver room. I have some questions about their wide receiver room at Clemson and how young it is. They have 2 freshmen that are going to be impact freshmen this year at wide receiver. And that's the one thing that I'm a little skeptical about with Clemson is their wide receiver room. Now, they have Will Shipley's back, and so is Cade Klubnik. That I don't have any problems with. And same with their offensive line. Of course, Dabo Swinney, probably one of the best coaches of all time in the ACC. And Clemson, I can see little teaser to something in the future. Clemson is not on upset alert week 1. There's an SEC team on upset alert that is playing Clemson in week 1. Put your guesses in the comments section down below as to who that might be. And I know the point spread is very high on that game because I've already looked at it, but I'm willing to take the gamble on that being an upset. But you'll have to see that and all the rest of my upsets for week 1 of college football in the middle of August. But back to my top 5 post-spring ACC teams. At number 4 is Miami of Florida. And Miami, Florida is at number 4 because I like what Mario Cristobal has done in the portal. He got Damian Martinez from Oregon State, and he got a bunch of 3 or 4 guys on defense that were either in the ACC or other conferences on other teams to transfer to Miami. And he also had a really good recruiting class. And I think Miami's going to have a really good season. At number 3 is probably going to be a surprise to some people. It is SMU. And yes, I know SMU won the American last year, but I think they will compete in year 1 in the ACC. Preston Stone, this is a name to watch this year in the ACC, a quarterback to watch. It is Preston Stone from SMU. Preston Stone is really good. He picked apart and torched. I know some of the defenses in the American are not very good. There's a few in the American that are good. And I will be talking about the American Athletic Conference after I'm done with the ACC. But I think SMU will compete in their first year in the ACC. At number 2 is Louisville. And I thought Jeff Brom, I thought it was a good hire, but I had low expectations for Louisville last year. I did not expect them to do as good as they did with Jack Plummer as their quarterback. I'm very high on Louisville this year, and I hope it doesn't come back to bite me. That is why they're number 2 on my post-spring top 5 for the ACC. I like what Jeff Brom did in the offseason this year with Louisville, getting another transfer quarterback. And I think Louisville is going to continuously compete in the ACC this year and for years to come. And I think Louisville might be one of the surprise teams to make the playoff this year in college football. But let's get to my number 1 team in the ACC. It is Florida State. And Florida State, I mean, they did lose Jordan Travis. They did lose Trey Benson, Keon Coleman, but they reloaded. They still have some good running backs. And they did get a transfer quarterback in DJ Uiagalelei from Oregon State. And I just want to say that I think DJU is going to do really good at Florida State and maybe improve his draft stock a little bit for the draft next year. And I think Florida State's going to be one of the best teams in the ACC. Now, we get to my updated hot seat ACC top 5 coaches. At number 5 is Justin Wilcox of Cal. Now, we heard all throughout last year in 2023 how Cal wanted to get rid of Justin Wilcox. They never ended up doing it because they ended up making a bowl game. Now they're going into a tougher conference in the ACC. The Pac-12 was difficult, but they're going to the ACC where you have Florida State, Miami, Clemson, Louisville, Virginia Tech, Pitt, Wake Forest. And I just don't see, in year one, I don't see Cal really. I can see them winning 5 to 6 games, but I don't see them competing for a conference championship in year one in the ACC. Now, could I be wrong and they end up winning the ACC in their first year? Absolutely, I could be wrong, and it wouldn't be the first time. Not all the time do I get everything right. Sometimes I get it wrong. Sometimes I do get it right. But I think Justin Wilcox he's at number 5 because I think there's a chance Cal keeps him again in yet another year. At number 4 is Pat Narduzzi, Pittsburgh. Now, with Pat Narduzzi, the Pitt could have fired him last year. They had a horrific season, but they kept him. And unfortunately, I think it's going to be the same fate this year unless they have a 1 or 2 win season and they feel like, we need new life and we need a new voice in the locker room, a new head coach. And then that's when Narduzzi gets canned. I think he'll be one of the last coaches to get fired this year. Because I think Pitt's going to have a bounce back season. At number 3 is University of Virginia's Tony Elliott. And the reason I think Tony Elliott might get fired is because I think Virginia again this year is probably going to be one of the worst teams in the ACC. They have a question mark at QB, and they don't know who their quarterback's going to be, and that's a problem. If you don't know who your quarterback's going to be, then you're going to have issues winning games because you're going to have a rotation at quarterback. And I hope Virginia doesn't do that, but if they do, that's their demise and their problem, not mine. Because I am not going to bet on Virginia winning more than 3 or 4 games this year. But I could see Tony Elliott being one of the first 4 coaches to get canned this year in college football. At number 2, and this was a head scratcher for me when Boston College hired this guy, Bill O'Brien. He had been with Ohio State for all of 2 weeks, and then Boston College named him the head coach. Now, we've seen this movie before. He was a good head coach in the NFL with the Texans until the Texans made him head coach and GM, and he gutted that team. And his image went down the drain. So then he went to Alabama and was the offensive coordinator there for a couple of years. Then he went back to the NFL and was the offensive coordinator for the Patriots. And they had a couple decently good offenses. Then he went to Ohio State and became the offensive coordinator there. He was supposed to be the offensive coordinator this year. But then Jeff Hafley left for the NFL. So Boston College needed a new head coach. And they decided, why don't we take Bill O'Brien from Ohio State? Now, I'm sorry, I I don't think this relationship between Bill O'Brien and Boston College is going to last. I think one of two things happens. Either he gets fired after 2 years, or a better job becomes available, and he takes that and leaves Boston College after 1 or 2 years. I think it's more likely the other way. I think he gets fired after this year, or at some point in the year when Boston College struggles and only wins 4 or 5 games, and they say, oh, this was not a good hire, and we should not have hired Bill O'Brien. And it's the sad reality. Bill O'Brien probably should have stayed at Ohio State for at least a year and been the offensive coordinator. But to each is their own. And at number 1 is Wake Forest. Dave Clawson, head coach at Wake Forest. Wake Forest was tragic last year. They were gosh darn awful. And I think they're going to be gosh darn awful again this year. And Dave Clawson might be one of the first head coaches to get the boot, to get fired, to get his unemployment check and say, see ya, bye, and get fired. Because they don't have a quarterback. They have a somewhat subpar offensive line and wide receiver room. Running back room is half decent. But I just don't see a way where they win more than 3 games. And now we get to the AAC, the American Athletic Conference. And before we start with the AAC, if you've been enjoying this video, please remember to leave a thumbs up on it and comment your favorite college football team, tradition, or where you think I should go in 2026 for my college football trip. I'm thinking Auburn or maybe Tennessee, but I would like to hear from my community in the comment section down below where y'all think I should go in 2026 for my college football trip. Because this year, like I said, I'm going to Virginia Tech, and I will be vlogging the whole time I'm up there, all 4 days. The 5th day, I fly home, but all 4 days I'm up there, I will be vlogging. But back to the program. Back to the podcast episode. So here's my updated top 5 American Athletic Conference teams after spring football. At number 5 is FAU. And with FAU, I've liked what I've seen from them this offseason. And to say I was surprised how they ended last year. I knew that Tom Herman's their coach, and I knew Herman was a good coach. He was good at Ohio State, good at Texas. He had some issues at Texas toward the end of his tenure there. But I think Tom Herman and FAU are going to be one of the 5 best teams in the AAC this year. At number 4 is UTSA. And this is mainly based on their head coach, Jeff Traylor, because they have a new quarterback this year. It is not going to be Frank Harris anymore. Frank Harris has graduated. It felt like Frank Harris was at UTSA for ages, a long time. But he graduated, so now they have a new quarterback. And I feel like UTSA is going to be another one of those teams that's going to be in the top half of the AAC next year, in 2024, whether it be because of Jeff Traylor or just how good their offense always is. At number 3 is Tulane. Tulane is replacing Michael Pratt, but I think Tulane is going to be another one of those teams in the American that is going to be really good and will have a really good season without Michael Pratt, and they might compete for one of the group of 5 spots in the college football playoff. At number 2 is Memphis. Seth Hennigan is back. And he's another guy that feels like he's been at Memphis forever. He's been there for quite a long time. And I think Memphis kind of scares me in the American. The American now, if you haven't noticed, there's been a lot of turnover in the last 2 to 3 years in the American. SMU leaving. Cincinnati leaving. Houston leaving. That's 3 big dogs in the American that left. And 2 of them are over in the ACC. And so that means the American is now wide open. And any of these teams I talk about could win the American. And at number 1 is South Florida. I'm enthusiastically happy with what USF has done. University of South Florida has done over the offseason. Golish going into year 2. Byron Brown going into his second full year as the starting quarterback. And they lost very few guys in the portal. I think they maybe lost 2 or 3 guys in the portal that transferred. But I think that USF will probably win the American this year. And watch out, Byron Brown might be on one of my awards list when the preseason awards come out for the College Football Podcast. Now we get to my top 5 updated coaches hot seat in the American Athletic Conference. And I have some doozies on it. For example, number 5, Biff Poggi, Charlotte. I don't see Charlotte being good this year. And I think that's going to come at the expense of Biff Poggi. I think Biff Poggi gets fired at some point this year if Charlotte doesn't win more than 3 games. I will tell you, number 1 is the most obvious coach to get fired in the American. He should have been fired last year, and I will talk about it in a minute. But at number 4 is Mike Blomgren of Rice. He saved his job last season by winning 6 games and getting Rice into a bowl game. If he doesn't get them back to a bowl game this year, I think he's gone. Because they're going to want somebody that can, like I said a minute ago, the American Athletic Conference is extremely wide open. And I think anybody can win the conference now, except for maybe Army or Navy. I think Army and Navy compete, but I don't think either of them are winning the American. But at number 3 is Trent Dilfer. This one I had so many questions when UAB hired Trent Dilfer, and I still have questions. There was better options on the market than Trent Dilfer, who has never been a head coach anywhere. You could have gone for Herm Edwards. You could have gone for Urban Meyer. You could have gone for somebody else. Maybe Bob Stoops, if you could get him to come out of retirement. But Trent Dilfer, I think Dilfer gets fired this year at some point. If UAB does not win a bunch of games. At number 2 is Mike Houston of ECU. And this one, I don't understand why he's still coaching. I thought he would have been fired at the end of last season. Now, could he get fired if ECU wins maybe 1 or 2 games, doesn't win more than 3 or 4 games this year? Yes, he absolutely could. Will he? That's the $1 million question. And at number 1 This is the most obvious guy to get fired in the American. Stan Drayton Temple. Everybody was talking about Drayton last year getting fired. And he somehow made it through the entire season and did not get fired by Temple. I think he gets fired this year and they hire somebody else. I don't think Temple's winning more than 3 games. Absolutely not. If you look at their schedule, as I said Thursday at 4 o'clock, we have the episode where I go over everybody's win total and tell you over or under their win total. And I just don't think that Temple is going to go over their win total. I really don't. And that's why I think Stan Drayton may be one of the first guys to get the old golden ticket that says, look, we're sorry, but here's your unemployment. Here's your unemployment line. And that is that for that portion of the podcast. So, but we're not done with the podcast yet. We have a little bit more to talk about. I want to continue with the whole NCAA talking about abolishing the whole walk-on rule. I'm sorry, but there's kids that can't get recruited by colleges, and you're going to just let them walk on at that school? I don't think that's right. I think you need to have maybe 1 or 2 walk-ons a year, but it can't be kids that were former 5-stars like Cormani McLean. That's just blasphemy. It blows my mind that you're going to let a kid that's a former 5-star that didn't play at Colorado at all because of off-the-field issues and issues with Coach Prime, you're just going to let him go to Florida and walk on, but still get paid with NIL money. Explain to me how that makes any sense. Does it make sense? Absolutely not. Not to me. I just don't see how that makes sense. Make it make sense to me, please, on how you can have a former 5-star and Cormani McLean go in the portal and not a single school. I mean, there was rumblings like USF was in on him, Florida was in on him, Miami. I think there was a couple SEC schools in on him, but he ends up going to UF and he's going to be a walk-on. I just don't understand how that makes a lot of sense. Again, in the comments, please let me know where you want the college football podcast to go in 2026 for our college football trip. But I think that's going to end today's stream. We will see you with another 2 episodes of the college football podcast on Thursday starting at 4 o'clock. And Thursday is also episode 1 of the Colorado Rockies franchise. Thank you. Have a lovely rest of your Tuesday morning.